Today I'd like to continue our journey through chapter 7 of the Gospel of Matthew. This is the section called the Sermon on the Mount. And in this section, verses 16 of chapter 7 and following, Jesus gets into the idea of the fruits. And he says, "By their fruits you will know them. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles?" Jesus is saying, these false prophets that we're talking about. Well, how do we know that they are false prophets? They might appear to us to be fine people, wonderful people. We might say, well, I want to follow that person. He seems really like a nice person. But Jesus says, well, step back a little, discern a bit, and look for the fruits that that person is producing. Are they producing peace, love, kindness, gentleness, caring? Are they creating more of a sense of community? These are things we want to look for in a person. So Jesus says, just as every good tree bears good fruit, a rotten tree bears bad fruit. So if there's some bad fruit coming from that prophet, if what they're saying doesn't lead to good, doesn't lead to peace, doesn't lead to happiness, then you step back and say, well, wait a minute. This fruit is not too good. This person is not producing things that are going to be helpful for me and for the community. Maybe I shouldn't follow that kind of prophet. A good tree, Jesus says, cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a rotten tree bear good fruit. So again, we have to look for the fruit that that person is bearing. And then Jesus goes further and says, well, every tree that does not bear good fruit is going to be cut down, and it's going to be thrown into the fire. So if it's not producing, if the fruit isn't good, we've got to get rid of that tree because it could lead to spoiling other trees. So we have to discard it. We have to throw it in the fire. So again, with a prophet who is preaching a message that isn't leading to good, we want to discard that prophet. We don't want to listen to that prophet. We don't want to affirm that prophet because we know that the fruits have not been good. This same passage is found from the preaching of John the Baptist. So Jesus here is very consistent in proclaiming that teaching of John the Baptist about the fruit and the tree. So Jesus says then, by their fruits you will know them, in verse 20 of chapter 7. So again, a good way to judge is by those fruits. The theme of bearing a good fruit is a favorite theme in Matthew. We see in Matthew 3, chapter 3, verse 10, even now the axe lies at the root of the trees. Therefore, every tree that does not bear good fruit will be cut down and thrown into the fire. You see that in the teaching of John the Baptist. So, got to get rid of those bad trees. Just like a prophet who is not producing good fruit. We can't follow that prophet. Also, fiery destruction for a tree that does not bear good fruit. Matthew 3, chapter 3, verse 12. His winnowing fan is in his hand. He will clear his threshing floor and gather his wheat into his barn, but the chaff he will burn with unquenchable fire. So that which is bad, we have to get rid of it by fire. And again, the destructive power of fire, the idea that fire would reduce it to ashes, that you wouldn't have to deal with it anymore after it's been in the fire. In the Gospel of Matthew chapter 13, verse 40, just as weeds are collected and burned up with fire, so will it be at the end of the age. Again, fire used as the sign of destruction. Many times, of course, in our colloquial way of understanding hell, we associated that with fire. And this would, of course, be consistent with these passages we see from Matthew about the fire. But the concept here really is the destructive aspect of fire. We've got to get rid of the evil. We've got to get rid of the falsehood. We've got to get rid of the bad fruit. And of course, the people at the time would know that this would be done usually by fire. That fire would get rid of it. In the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 18, verse 8, if your hand or foot causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to enter into life maimed or crippled with 2 hands or 2 feet to be thrown into eternal fire. So if those hands are no good, boom, get rid of them, because they're causing you to sin. So anything that causes you to sin, get rid of it. It's bad fruit, it's bad stuff, get rid of it, you don't need it, throw it into the fire, destroy it. What is Jesus saying here? Does he want us to literally cut off hand and feet? He wants us to turn away from sin, turn away from selfishness, turn away from destructiveness, turn away from those evil habits that really can destroy not only ourselves, but other people in the community. Then in Matthew 25, verse 41, the judge is saying, then he will say to those on his left, depart from me, you accursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. So again, this eternal fire, this idea of destroying the evil, getting rid of the evil, purifying oneself of evil. You don't need the evil. It's not going to help you in your life. Get rid of it, destroy it. And Jesus goes on in chapter 7 to talk about, well, now, what makes someone a true disciple? It's interesting as a follow-up to this idea of the false prophets. We have to get rid of them because we've discerned that their fruits aren't good. So we have false prophets. We have this fire, getting rid of the evil, the bad fruit. Well, what makes someone then a true disciple? How can we know that we are truly following Jesus? So Jesus says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. You would think, well, these people are saying, Lord, Lord, they should be first online to get into heaven. Oh, Jesus says, no, just because they're saying, Lord, Lord, not going to necessarily get them into heaven by their speech. Well, what will get in them into heaven? What is a true disciple? Well, Jesus says, but only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. So the person who actually follows God and does God's will, that is the person who will enter into paradise. So it's not just about our talking, it's about our doing. Do we do acts of compassion and acts of love? Do we feed the hungry? Do we clothe the naked? Do we help those that are in distress? Do we reach out to those that are sick? Do we do those deeds of love? This kind of reflects the teaching from the Hebrew scriptures that we find in Isaiah chapter 29, verse 13. The Lord said, since this people draws near to me with words only, and honors me with their lips alone, though their hearts are far from me, and their reverence for me has become routine observance of the precepts of men. Isaiah is warning us here what can happen in terms of our relationship with God. We can draw near to God and honor God, but it's just with our lips. We can go to Mass, we can go to church, we can go to synagogue, we can go to our mosque, we can say the right prayers, but are we really following God? Not if our hearts are in a different place. If our hearts aren't full of love, if we're not embracing the message of God in our actions, in our everyday thoughts and deeds, then what have we gained? Our hearts are far from our God. And reverence then can become just routine observance. And routine observance, not even of God's precepts, but of the precepts of men, Isaiah says. We're following what the men have set up, the people have set up, right? We're following that. And we're not even listening to our God and trying to follow what our God says. Our hearts are far from God. But we do the things we do in order to be seen in the eyes of others. When I go to church, when I go to the mosque, when I go to the synagogue, it looks good. Am I following the precepts of God? Am I following the way of God, the will of God, or the precepts of men only? And so Isaiah kind of sets us in the right direction. Jesus reaffirms this and says we can't just say, Lord, Lord, and think we're going to enter the kingdom. No, we have to do the will of the Father. We have to act on the message that God gives us.